Now, thousands of protesters in the country of Georgia have been protesting for 5 days. They're demanding their president, Mikhail Saakashvili, resign. Now, these protests have turned violent on the country's Independence Day. Take a look behind me at these images. Georgian police have been dispersing anti-government protesters in the capital of Tbilisi, using tear gas, batons, and water cannons to disperse thousands of opposition supporters. Now, many have been injured as well. The protesters accuse Saakashvili, who is backed by the West, of abusing his position to maintain power. Also, economic conditions such as rising food prices have driven them to the streets, according to our reporter on the ground. Now, in the midst of an Arab Spring, are we seeing some of the same revolutionary tides now in this former Soviet republic? And where is the Western mainstream media? We'll get to that analysis in a moment, but first, a phone interview earlier with our reporter on the ground, Sarah Firth. Take a listen.
Hello there, Sarah. So, where are you and what's happening there at the moment? Any injured?
Well, we're just near the main Parliament building where the protests were happening and where the violence broke out just a little while ago. Now, there's still a very, very heavy police presence around that area. There were a huge number that turned out to disperse the crowd. They came in from both sides. There were columns on both sides of those crowds that moved in just after midnight. Today, Georgia's Day of Independence, and it's starting with those violent clashes between the police and demonstrators. Now, what we saw after they cleared the main demonstration very, very quickly, they were firing water cannons, rubber bullets. There was a lot of gas around as well. It was extremely hectic, extremely violent. It happened very, very quickly. It really escalated very fast. You could see people being thrown to the ground. The protesters themselves, a lot of them had their faces covered and were carrying sticks. Just before the police, when they were walking up, the crowds were getting extremely het up. There was a lot of shouting, a lot of aggression going on. So as we said, when they actually entered the crowd, it happened extremely fast. At the moment, the police are still on the scene, and really the area around is devastated. The main trucks on which the opposition party were giving their talks today to the crowd, that's all been destroyed. The posters hanging off now. You can actually see the rubber bullets and the empty shells on the street. And the police dispersing the people who are still there. Now, what we've actually seen, we've just been up near one of the buildings where the police are still emptying those buildings and making arrests for some of the people inside. We weren't actually too sure what was going on because these people, it's been pouring with rain today. A lot of these people we saw being pulled out of the buildings were bone dry, so they obviously hadn't been taking part in that main demonstration, but they were coming out of those buildings. There was glass everywhere, and they were bloody as well, and being arrested and put into the vans and driven away, and that's all still going on at the moment.
Yeah, are there any reports of any arrests were made? And actually, we're getting reports right now, right here, that several journalists have been detained by the police there. What's going to happen to them now?
Well, we've heard the same reports. We haven't got any confirmation on the Georgian media being arrested, but we do know that a number of the correspondents and camera crews that were around on the scene have been quite severely injured. We've heard one colleague who had his fingers broken, another's got quite a serious head injury. Lots of cameras were destroyed when it all started. I mean, we were warned beforehand, and certainly that was the case, that when the violence started, the police weren't distinguishing at all between media and the demonstrators. And of course, as we said, it was all the more shocking because this has been dubbed the Silver Revolution, so a lot of the people in the crowd were of an older generation, and we could see a lot of those people coming out, and a lot of the people being arrested with serious injuries, heavy bleeding, and they were all quite old. So that was certainly very shocking. As we said, yes, the media as well getting involved in that. Now, we know that Nina Dzhinazi, what we've heard is that she's the leader of one of the main opposition parties, and the opposition party that led the rally today. Apparently, she's not been arrested. She's been let go. But there's certainly been a large number of arrests made. Now, the number of police actually was speaking to the Georgian correspondents who were here, and they were there for the November 2007 protests as well. They said the number of police outnumbered even those protests. The numbers in comparison to how many protests there were, there really was no comparison. And 1,000 protesters at most remaining in that central square when the police entered. There were thousands of police, there were armoured vehicles, and the violence really escalating extremely quickly.
That was RT correspondent Sarah Firth giving the very latest from the ground. And joining me now for more in studio for some analysis is Wayne Madsen. He is an RT contributor. Wayne, thanks so much for being here. Now, I want to just start because there is kind of all of these, little similarities between Georgia and what's going on there, and also what was going on in Egypt, and even comparing Saakashvili and Mubarak. But before we get to that, some of the things that brought protesters to the streets in Georgia have been rising food prices, state-sanctioned corruption are the allegations, and protesting their leader. Some of the same things that brought people to the streets reportedly in Egypt. Do you think we're seeing a similar situation in Georgia? Do you think we're seeing a similar movement as we saw in Egypt?
Well, I do believe it is a popular rebellion against somebody who's entrenched, who is not a pro-democracy leader by any stretch. The difference is, of course, is that Saakashvili, the head of a prospective NATO member, we all know that Georgia's been knocking on NATO's door for several years now. He has the support of the U.S. and France, and we've heard from the U.S. and French ambassadors in Tbilisi that, oh, maybe there's provocateurs among these protesters, but they've been giving Saakashvili nothing but support. Now, Saakashvili, on the other hand, is claiming that somehow Russia's behind these rebellions. He's doing the same thing that Gaddafi did in Libya by blaming al-Qaeda, and Mubarak, of course, blamed everybody for his problems. The president of Yemen, the president of Syria. The difference is Saakashvili is a U.S. puppet. He was installed in one of those themed revolutions, which we know that George Soros and the CIA pumps a lot of money into. And the difference is he's our guy, and we're not going to see a no-fly zone over Georgia imposed by NATO anytime soon.
Well, that's a really good point. The United States has given Georgia $1 billion through USAID since '92. That's just one example of the aid, and it's a small country of just 4 million or so. And in return, Georgia has supported the United States in Iraq with, I think, 2,000 troops was at the peak of their involvement, and they've also committed troops to Afghanistan. So they're helping on the war on terror. So this relationship, how much does the U.S. back Georgia? And you said you believe they're going to continue to, despite protests. What
absolutely. The U.S. has a lot of investments in Georgia, and we had Saakashvili already come out and say, look, this is going to potentially harm foreign investment in Georgia, using the typical neoconservative talking points, and using this specter of Russia somehow being involved. We do know that the U.S. Has had a military relationship with Georgia, even when they invaded South Ossetia and Abkhazia. There were U.S. armored personnel carriers captured by the Russian forces. We also know that there's private security companies in Georgia, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're not advising the Georgian security forces on how to put down these demonstrations. Because one thing I noticed that was very interesting is there's going to be a military parade. They don't want these protesters near the military parade in honor of the Georgian Revolution, Independence Day, and so they're talking about moving them to a free speech zone. Gee, we have those here in the United States. I wonder where they got that idea.
I've seen those at every protest I've covered for any big event like the G20. I want to just talk about a couple other little comparisons with Mubarak. I mean, Georgia is a country that people were saying, they're praising for economic reforms and economic progress, and we saw some of those praises in Egypt before all of this happened in regards to, their reconstruction of their economy. Also, too, a lot of Mubarak's former allies became the opposition that was protesting against him. Similarly, we're seeing that in Saakashvili with people that rallied for some people would not agree with your take on things. They'd say it was a popular, uprising that brought him to power in 2004. Do you see these leaders as comparable, and do you think their falls will be similar? Do you think do you think Saakashvili will stay in power?
Well, like Mubarak, we certainly know that one of the criticisms by the opposition is the corruption rampant in his government. It's a very nepotistic administration he runs, so we're seeing a lot of people saying, enough is enough, leaving his government, joining the opposition. So in that respect, Saakashvili, his corruption seems to be very similar to that of Mubarak in Egypt and Ben Ali in Tunisia. except with this big difference. The U.S. supports this dictator, and this shows the hypocrisy of the Obama administration when it comes to Georgia or Bahrain or any of these regimes that we support for military and strategic purposes. These popular uprisings get no support from Washington.
Really quickly, I am out of time. I was just I'm hoping I can get one more question with you in. Real quickly, why do you think the Western media hasn't been paying attention to this? They were very captured by all of the protests in the Middle East and North Africa.
They take their cues from the White House, I think. I mean, they're corporate owned, and the White House puts the word out. And, you know, yes, Libya, yes, Syria, but not Georgia.
All right. I want to thank you so much. That was Wayne Madsen, investigative journalist and RT contributor.